where do you stand on having the ability to get to a point where you can deploy on Fridays?
Strongly agree.
We disagree.
Disagree.
I don't think the effort is worth it to try and get to a point where you can deploy on Friday.
You want to get your system to a point where you can deploy anytime.
Let's talk about deployment Fridays.
Okay.
So we've got this thing in our organization and in general where you don't deploy on a Friday.
Hashtag no deploy Friday.
And with good reason, because if the system breaks, you don't want to work on the weekend.
Sure.
But where do you stand on having the ability, should you actually focus as hard as you can to get to a point where you can deploy on Fridays?
Strongly agree.
Strongly agree.
If that last part is the question.
That is the question.
Okay.
I'm going to disagree.
Why are you disagreeing?
Okay, I think that's a good one. Let me start with my disagreement,
Okay,
and then you can do why you strongly agree. Okay, I disagree because I don't think the effort is worth it to try and get to a point where you can deploy on Fridays. I think that in most circumstances, practically it's possible to get to a point where you can have automated pipelines, you can deploy in the week, but it feels to me like that last, let's call it 10% of automation and testing that is needed for you to be safe in the way where you are going to risk your whole weekend such that you can deploy on a Friday is not worth the cost.
Well, I suppose then I can put in an argument that, like, as you develop the system that you're developing, there are certain things that you should do as you go.
Okay.
So that is, write your unit tests and your integration tests and make sure they pass before you deploy. But as a system matures, like over time, you should always be making it more stable and more robust. And it obviously it's effort, but forget about Fridays. Like you want to get your system to a point where you can deploy anytime. If that's 20 times a day, that should also be safe. So whether that's a Friday or a Monday, it's irrelevant. So you should always feel safe. So, and the reason that's important is if you feel safe that you can deploy at any time, 20 times a day, because your infrastructure and your testing and everything is good, then you can iterate faster. So then you can scale better. You can get new people on the team, and on day one they could make a change to production, and the flywheel can just keep on going. So it's, for me, it's worth the effort to get to that point.
I like what you're saying. So what you're saying is it's not about the Friday. The Friday is a symbol. It's about the ability to deploy way more often and not be getting stuck with bugs or production failing. Because if you're afraid to deploy on a Friday,
you're always going to be afraid. That's my point.
That's the point. Okay, yes. I like that because then you're risking a Wednesday going wrong, and Thursday and Friday you are unproductive because now you need to fix production.
Exactly.
errors.
So it's 100%, for me, my opinion, it's 100% worth the effort to get the system you're working on to that point of maturity where you can deploy on a Friday afternoon right before you go and drink your beers.
Where do you think is that point? How do you get there?
Well, as I said earlier, I think it's something, it should be
built
part
in.
of the DNA of how you develop software.
Let's take an example here. What if you're in a situation where you've developed things now, it's in production, it's running, it's risky right now to deploy, right? How do you know, okay, so let's say you are going to put in the effort, you want to be there where you can deploy on a Friday. How do you know how do you get there, and how do you know when you're there?
Well, that's a difficult question because 100% these situations, I'm sure all of us, all the developers in the world have been in these situations.
Yes.
It's not realistic to always have something that you've got 100% confidence
Yes.
in. Sometimes you inherit code bases. Sometimes there was like pressure to get something done and shortcuts were taken. Like this happens.
I mean, you need to build
Yeah.
an MVP to understand the risk of something. You didn't spend as much time on the code base as you would have wanted to, but now you've got the luxury to do a bit more and get a bit more robust. But what do you do?
I think it's probably like a proof is in the pudding type thing. Oh, this is very grey now, but I think you get a gut feel. If it's, let's take the example of a web application
Yes.
out in the wild. Like, I'm sure everybody will have some way, or hopefully everybody has some way of monitoring how this production deployment is going. Like, oh, are we getting errors? Are we getting user complaints? Things like that. So I think there are many kind of measures of stability that you, outside of just code coverage and your own confidence and things like that.
Okay.
And obviously, the more metrics, the better, because then you have a better idea of reality. But I don't have a better answer than, I suppose it's like you're gonna know. You're gonna know if you haven't been called for 3 months and you've been getting feedback, you've been talking to users and they are happy.
Yes.
They're getting the value they want.
Yes.
I suppose you over time you kind of get an idea of the stability of the system.
I like what you're saying, because in some way there is look, we haven't had production failures. We've been deploying this whole month and there's been very little production failures. Therefore, the risk of the next deployment is low. We've got testing in place. By the way, new one on this topic. Should your code coverage be more than 90%? Your code, okay, let me rephrase that. Your code coverage should be more than 90%. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I think like the more of your code
I'm strongly disagree.
The more of your code you can cover, the better. That doesn't mean having 100% code coverage is a silver bullet and you can be 100% confident.
Should you have 100% code coverage?
Well, you probably should. Typically, it's like you aim to it. Sometimes it's difficult to get there. I know lots of people would probably disagree with me and say you should, but I think being pragmatic, you should aim to get it as high as possible. So
my opinion on this one is 100% is in some way an interesting metric. 90% is in some way an interesting metric. You could even argue 80% is a good metric. But why? Because it depends more on how you test. It depends on what has been tested.
Yes.
And some cases, it's just not worth the cost or the effort to test certain parts in the code. It just isn't.
I think it's something you should strive towards, but then again, as I said earlier, it's not a silver bullet. Like, there's testing and then there's testing. Sometimes you're only testing the happy path.
That's true.
Or something, and there is some weird combination of inputs that could have a very interesting
or detrimental effect.
Some side effects that hidden somewhere that you're not even aware of. Obviously, this depends on how you write the code and what have you.
And I think that's probably important. Like, maybe the point is not to get stuck on code coverage. You have a good percentage of code coverage, but it's more about how you're testing the things that you are writing than how much you've covered yourself. Yes. So you could have 100% code coverage and then are not really testing anything.
Exactly. So especially the other day we talked about data applications. So I'm not going to go deep into what a data application is now, but most of the issues we see with data applications is the data.
Not the application.
Not the application. So 100% code coverage, you thought that, okay, the data is always going to look like this, so I'm going to mock it out and test these things and great, everything passes. Then suddenly I don't know, there's some weird schema change of some weird value in a column, and then everything explodes in some unexpected way that you didn't think is possible. So, yeah, 100% test coverage. Aim for it. It's not a silver bullet though. Get better at writing tests as well.
You've convinced me actually on this one. Like, I like the idea that if you have the ability to deploy at any time, it's a lot safer, it's a lot less riskier. Suddenly, let's forget about Fridays. Sunday or Saturday, when you need to fix something, you are not stressing. Everybody's not being stressed because you know that the deployment is going to be fine.
Exactly.
If you needed to roll something out at that point. So, yeah, okay, I'm with you.
Well, so basically, I think deploy Fridays. Let's aim for that.
That's the target, deploy Fridays. I guess at this point as well, what I like the audience to think about is, where do they stand on the specific topic? So is it either...
Well, maybe, like, where do they stand on the topic, and with the different things they're building, where are they? Are they confident to deploy on a Friday or not?
Can you deploy on a Friday? That's number one, can you deploy on a Friday? And then number two, are you aiming to be able to deploy on a Friday?